Hi, my name is Elijah White, and this is my book presentation on the book that we have just read, The Things They Carried. This book was written by William Timothy O'Brien. He was an American novelist that was born on October 1st, 1946, which makes him 75 years old today, or to this day. Most of us know him for the book that we have just read, which is The Things They Carry, but he has wrote a, a decent amount of books on his experiences of the Vietnam War, which I have heard they are pretty good, and I've seen them, and I do recommend looking into them a little bit more. But right now, we'd be looking at the book, The Things They Carried. This story is about everything that the soldier had to carry, not only physical and the stuff that's in their bag or on their person, but also mental and emotional and guilt and everything that they had to carry inside them and on their head and on their psychological shoulders. The story is a true story about the experiences that O'Brien had while serving in the Vietnam War and after the Vietnam War. But he explains that all the experiences are just what has happened. And I say true because he might have added a few things or taken away a few things just to make the story more relevant. But in the story, we see that throughout all the chapters, there's a reoccurring main character. And it kind of just talks about his different experiences. It shows us the different stories, from his love for Martha to the guilt of killing a man on the path, to a woman coming onto base and then going missing as pretty much a Green Beret, to his daughter asking him if he's killed anyone, and he had to lie and tell him no because he wants to have that conversation for a later day or until she's older. There's a lot of different things and different aspects in this book, but they show us the different parts of the war and what these soldiers did have to go through. Now, with this assignment in mind, I was looking at the physical aspects of things. I didn't necessarily look at the mental and emotional aspects of things. But until I looked at the title and read The Things They Carried and not the objects they carried, because emotions aren't objects. And that's what I kind of wanted to dive in deeper about and talk about, which is the emotions from death. We see that there's a lot of deaths in this story, and there's a lot of emotions as well. We see that in great detail. We see how he explains what the person looks like and how that makes him feel. And I'm sure you've read and saw and thought of all these things, but if you haven't, then it's a different way to think about the story and the book itself. But if you think about it, we don't really understand the concept of death. We haven't experienced death itself, and maybe you have been there, maybe some of you have, but I personally haven't been in front of death, like of someone else. I have seen like somebody that has died, but you don't experience the actual point of when they die most of the time. And if you have, I'm sorry, but I just haven't. But even though I haven't, I still have a lot of emotions towards death. I genuinely get sad, and it's not a good thing to me. Some people may think it's a good thing, and other people may think it's a bad thing. It's all personal, and to every human, it's one of those or in the middle. But we forget that soldiers have emotions too, and not every single soldier is in the middle. And we don't really see that until we read this book, because in the movie, in like movies like this below me in the picture, we kind of just see that it's chaos, and you don't really take in like the emotional aspect of the death and what they had to see. So in this book, you see that there's a lot of emotions and a lot of death and emotions that are attached to it. I want to understand if movies are better or worse than how this um, book described death, because this book described it in great detail, but movies show it a different way. So I wanted to see, does that be affected? And these are just questions because it helps me with the research and it helps you think about the emotions. But I wanted to also see if the deaths really do impact the field in real life, because in my example, it really did impact how people like saw death or saw the field. Because in my example, I'm using the Ted Lavender death. He got shot in the head and he died instantly. But it was on Lieutenant Cross's watch, and he was like he's in charge of the crew, so he felt really guilty about this. So what I mean is that by changing the perspective and how they act on the field, is he changed the direction of how his men went about war. Before his death, he would allow his men to throw away the extra supplies that they wouldn't need. But after that, he wanted to stay prepared and make sure that they have everything. So he wouldn't allow his men to throw away. And with the death, he felt really guilty. He said that he stopped loving Martha and he burnt all her pictures. But it was more of like a love-hate relationship between his love towards Martha. But this image of Ted Lavender dying was engraved in his head even 20 years after the war had ended. And so he had to carry that for the rest of the war and for, those 20 years at least. It was what he had to carry and all the guilt and everything and sadness of the death. And I wanted to see if this was in real life, if this would happen in real life. And so my first primary source is Daniel Gannon. I saw an interview with him that was conducted by PBS. He said that his brother was killed in the war and he wanted a sort of revenge and he wanted to be better for his brother that had passed. In the interview, he said, "I got to go get those suckers for shooting my brother." Now, I feel like this relates to Jimmy Cross and the death of Ted Lavender, because Jimmy or Lieutenant Cross wanted to be a better lieutenant and make sure that this doesn't happen again. Daniel Gannon was also a lieutenant, but he wanted to just be a better soldier so that he could get revenge for his brother. He wanted to be better for his brother, whereas Lieutenant Cross wanted to be better for Ted Lavender. Now, the next primary source is Dennis Haynes. This was an interview that was on Oral Histories, and it was conducted by the Witness to War. Dennis Haynes fought in the Vietnam War, but he didn't really have an opinion on the war. He had a close friend, Jack, that had died in the war, but he kind of accepted it. He wasn't emotionally attached to the death, but he didn't have he didn't have any strong emotions, but he wasn't like super detached from it. In the interview, he said, "I didn't think a lot about it, and I just accepted for what it was." This means that it's not like he didn't care, but he didn't care. He was just neutral about everything. He was in the middle. Now, you see this in a soldier, and you think that every soldier is like this, but it's not. He did feel sorry for Jack. He was able to have the opportunity to choose if he wanted to be a body escort, but he ended up not doing it because he wanted to be better in the war. And you see that he's trying to improve, and it does impact the way that he is on the field. The next primary source is Barry L. Ramo. This was an interview conducted by Cesar Ruvalcaba. I'm pretty sure. I'm sorry if I butchered that name. Please let me know. But he was actually not really emotionally attached to death. He wanted to go to war. He actually stated in the interview that I wanted to go to Vietnam, kill communists. And he accepted death, and he knew that death was going to happen in the war. He had seen a lot of people die, but he knew that that was a part of war. So in a sense, he was on the like it side because he accepted it. He didn't want people to die, and he wanted to keep his men safe, but he accepted it and kind of worked with death. Whereas people on the no side don't really want to accept death, really. Barry was also a lieutenant, and he did fight in the war. It kind of shows that even though these three real people had different experiences, they all wanted to be good at war. Barry just wanted to be good at war before death. And after death, he just accepted it, and he accepted that people will die, but that's what it takes to be good at war. Now, in Haynes' case, he didn't accept it, but he did accept it, but he just said whatever. It was whatever to him. And in Gannon's case, he didn't accept it, and he said that he really didn't want it to happen, but it did make him a better person in the end. Now, do I think that this was realistic or not? Now, the emotions I'm talking about are the fact that Lieutenant Cross had a lot of sadness and a lot of guilt that weighed on his shoulders because of Ted Lavender's death and, of course, the other deaths. He had a lot of guilt even 20 years after the war had happened, like I had said. And you guys have seen that movies show us emotionless soldiers. And you kind of think that because they're in the war, they don't care. But as you have, if you read the book, you'll know that the one person that had died on that path was somebody that didn't want to go to war. He actually really hated it. But he had died for the war. He would have just been, he would have not died if he hadn't have gone to the war. He hated the war, whereas Barry liked the war. There's still humans, even though they are soldiers, they are still humans. Now, they're different. They're not going to be the same. But all of these soldiers had different emotions, different ways of showing, which are natural for humans. And it varies. Guilt and any sadness varies from person to person. Some people struggle with it really bad, and some people don't. Now, you kind of see the range of people from Lieutenant Cross to Barry. You do see that there are people in between, but just because Lieutenant Cross is like this doesn't mean that nobody else is like how Lieutenant Cross thinks. People are the same. Not everyone's the same, but people are alike. And you may think that it's not realistic for him to be still guilty about it 20 years after the war had even ended. But a lot of the soldiers suffer with PTSD. This is post-traumatic stress disorder. This is trauma that has been induced because of stress. Now, stress is because of guilt, really. If you look at it in Jimmy Cross's way, it's the guilt and the stress of how he wish he could have done something different. Now, in this book, I think that the author does do a really good job at showing the emotions of what some soldiers felt in the war. Now, all in all, I want to say that no, not everyone's alike. But this aspect of the war in this book was completely real because there wasn't any really over exaggeration. He did stay on task with going into the field and fighting. He did feel really guilty and he really wished that it wouldn't happen, didn't happen, but it did. And he felt the guilt and he carried the guilt. And that's what the things they carried is kind of relies on, because he carried the guilt. All in all, this was realistic because emotions vary from person to person, and you see that it does happen with these primary examples from Daniel, really, that I saw was the most alike. Now, they do all have something in common, but it does show that people vary. This is my references, and that is my presentation. Thank you.